Before the first light touches the mountains, a man stands alone. Barefoot, silent, unmoving. His sword is still sheathed, because the real battle has not yet begun. They say dawn reveals everything, but for those who walk the warrior's path, dawn is not a moment in the sky. It is a moment within. This is the story of one such warrior, torn between mastery and ego, courage and fear, silence and noise. A disciple of Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman who ever lived. Yet his truest lessons had little to do with killing, and everything to do with conquering the self. In the shadow of steel and the stillness of dawn, he would learn that discipline is the blade that cuts illusion, that silence is the true voice of strength, and that before you can conquer the world, you must first conquer yourself. Chapter 1. The Weight of Noise. The village awoke before the sun. Blacksmiths hammered, roosters screamed, merchants argued. The world was alive, and yet it was deaf. In the corner of that noise lived a young man named Hiroto, son of a fisherman, dreamer of battles. He trained with wooden swords until his hands blistered. He wanted strength, fame, the kind of power that made others bow. But behind every strike was a question he couldn't silence. When will I be enough? That question was the first sound of his downfall. One evening, word spread that Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated swordsman, was passing through the valley. Hiroto ran to him, bowing low, desperate to be accepted as his apprentice. Musashi's eyes were calm, almost empty. He looked through Hiroto, not at him. "You seek mastery," he said softly, "then sweep the dojo floor." Hiroto blinked. "Sweep? I came to learn the sword." Master Musashi didn't answer. He simply turned away, and so began Hiroto's first lesson. In silence, the dojo sat on the edge of a forest where the sound of wind whispered against bamboo. For days, Hiroto swept the same floor, dust rising, thoughts screaming. He kept glancing at Musashi, hoping for instruction, a form, a stance, anything. But Musashi only meditated, eyes closed, as if time itself bowed before his stillness. The boy's frustration grew. Every sweep felt like an insult. Every moment of quiet felt heavier. His mind was louder than any battlefield. He started counting his breaths to escape the noise. 1, 2. But thoughts slipped in. Old arguments, fears, desires, dreams. He cursed under his breath. How can silence be this loud? Musashi finally spoke. "Because you mistake noise for life," he said. "You carry the world inside you, even when you think you've left it behind." He rose and walked toward Hiroto, his presence calm yet commanding. "Discipline begins not with action," Musashi said, "but with awareness. When you cannot control your thoughts, you cannot control your sword." That night, Hiroto lay awake, hearing every creak, every insect, every whisper of the wind. It was unbearable, but slowly, something began to change. The next morning, he swept again, slower this time. He noticed how the bristles brushed the floor in rhythm with his breath. He felt the weight of his feet, the pull of the morning air. For the first time, the noise around him seemed distant. Something inside him began to quiet. Musashi watched from a distance, eyes half closed. He saw it, the first spark of presence. A week later, Musashi handed Hiroto a wooden sword. "Strike," he ordered. Hiroto swung with all his might. Fast, wild, powerful. Musashi didn't even move. He simply stepped aside. Again, Hiroto attacked until sweat drenched his robes. Each strike missed by an inch. Each breath turned ragged. Finally, Musashi raised his hand. "You hear only your own noise," he said. "Listen, not to me, but to the silence between your movements." Hiroto froze. His heart slowed. For the first time, he could hear it. The faint rhythm beneath all sound. His breath, the air, the pulse of the earth. That was the sound Musashi wanted him to find. Science would one day call it alpha state. A quiet rhythm in the brain where clarity blooms and focus deepens. But centuries before names were given, warriors like Musashi already knew. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the sharpening of attention. Through repetition, through quiet labor, the mind begins to empty. And when it empties, the spirit awakens. Hiroto looked down at the floor he'd swept for weeks. It was spotless now, but more importantly, so was his mind. Musashi approached him, his tone softer than before. "Only in silence," he said. "Do you hear the blade of the spirit?" Hiroto bowed, not in obedience, but in understanding. For the first time, he wasn't fighting the noise outside. He was learning to still the noise within. But silence alone is not peace. For when the mind grows quiet, fear begins to speak. Chapter 2: The Edge of Fear. The following dawn, Musashi led Hiroto beyond the village, past the forests, past the rivers, into the bones of the mountain. The air grew colder. The path narrowed until only one man could walk at a time. "Where are we going, master?" Hiroto asked. Musashi did not answer. They stopped at a cliff that opened into a sea of mist. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, a fall that promised death with a single misstep. Musashi pointed to the very edge. "Sit," he said. Hiroto hesitated. "It's dangerous." "That is the lesson." He obeyed. His legs trembled as he crossed the uneven stones. Wind whipped against his face, sharp as blades. The horizon flickered between night and light. The first blush of dawn. "Close your eyes," Musashi ordered. "Now, breathe." The boy inhaled, exhaled. At first, he heard the wind, then his heartbeat, then the whisper of panic rising inside him. His mind screamed, what if? What if he slipped? What if the ground crumbled? What if he never returned? His breaths grew shorter, his palms damp. He wanted to run, but Musashi's voice anchored him. "Do not move. Observe." In that stillness, fear became a mirror, showing Hiroto his rawest self. He saw flashes of childhood, failures, doubts, the shame of not being enough. The cliff didn't frighten him. Himself did. Musashi's voice drifted through the wind. "Fear is not your enemy, Hiroto. It is your teacher. It tells you where the walls are within." The young man clenched his fists. "But it feels like I'm dying." Musashi nodded. "Good. Then let the false self die. Every warrior must die before he truly lives." Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time dissolved. The body shook, but the breath stayed. The mind screamed, but the heart began to listen. Somewhere within that trembling silence, something subtle shifted. Hiroto realized he could not fight the wind, nor the cliff, nor death itself, but he could observe them without being ruled by them. That moment of observation became power. It was not resistance. It was presence. He breathed deeper. The edge no longer felt like a threat, but an invitation to witness, to surrender, to see. Musashi finally stepped closer, his shadow cutting through the morning light. "What did you see?" Hiroto's voice was quiet now. I saw fear, and it was just me. Musashi smiled faintly. Then you have seen truth. He knelt beside the boy, eyes reflecting the dawn. The untrained mind believes fear means stop. The trained mind understands fear means look deeper. The warrior sees fear not as a wall, but as a doorway. He picked up a small stone and tossed it from the cliff. They watched it vanish into fog. That stone does not fear falling. It obeys the path given to it. So must you from the summit. The world began to brighten. The first sunlight struck the valley below, scattering gold over rivers and rice fields. Hiroto opened his eyes. The wind no longer felt violent. It felt alive. Every gust that once pushed him back now carried a strange rhythm, like breath from the mountain itself. He realized fear never disappears, but when faced in silence, it transforms from enemy to guide, from chaos to compass. Modern minds might call it exposure therapy, the rewiring of the amygdala through repeated stillness. But Musashi's wisdom carried the same principle. Centuries before psychology found the words. To master fear, you must sit in its presence until it grows tired of haunting you. When they descended the mountain, Hiroto's steps were slower, firmer. He looked back at the cliff once more, bowing deeply. He did not know it then, but a part of him had been left behind. The part that trembled at uncertainty. And what returned down that mountain was not the same boy. That night, Musashi said only one thing before extinguishing the lanterns. Now that you have seen fear, it is time to face the reflection behind it. For fear guards the gate, but beyond that gate waits something far more dangerous. The ego. Chapter 3. The mirror of ego. Weeks passed. The mountain's silence still lingered inside Hiroto like a quiet river. But with every passing day, a new sound began to grow. Subtle at first, then louder. The sound of pride. He trained from dawn to dusk. His strikes grew sharper, his movements quicker. He started winning every spar in the dojo. Villagers began whispering about Musashi's new prodigy, and like a seed watered by attention, Hiroto's ego began to bloom. He told himself it was confidence, but it was not. It was hunger wearing the mask of mastery. One morning, a wandering swordsman arrived at the dojo. He had heard of the young student's skill and challenged him to a duel. Musashi said nothing, only gestured for Hiroto to accept. The courtyard filled with onlookers. Sunlight glinted off steel. Hiroto's heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with the thrill of being seen. When the swords crossed, his training took over. Every movement was precise, every strike clean. In less than a minute, the challenger fell to his knees. The crowd gasped. Hiroto smirked. He bowed shallowly, not to honor, but to display victory. Musashi's face, however, remained unreadable. That evening, while the village celebrated, Hiroto approached his master, with pride swelling in his chest. Did you see me, master? I defeated him cleanly. I felt unstoppable. Musashi looked at him quietly for a long moment. Then he handed Hiroto a broken wooden sword. Fight me, he said. Hiroto frowned. With this? Yes, Musashi replied. Show me your strength. They faced each other under the moonlight. The night was silent except for the sound of cicadas. Hiroto rushed forward, confidence burning, but Musashi did not move. He simply stepped aside, the same way he had weeks ago, and struck once, gently, across Hiroto's chest. The boy fell backward. Humiliation cut deeper than the blow. He shouted, "This isn't fair." You gave me a broken sword. Musashi's reply came like thunder breaking still air. No, Hiroto. You brought the broken sword with you. The words froze him. Musashi knelt, his tone colder now, every syllable precise. You think mastery is strength. Number. It is emptiness. You think victory defines you. Number. It reveals your weakness. He placed the wooden sword in front of Hiroto. Every time your ego swings the blade, it cuts you first. Hiroto's head lowered. The echo of the crowd's cheers suddenly felt hollow. He realized he had been fighting not his opponent, but his own reflection. Every victory had fed the same beast he swore to conquer. Days passed in silence. Hiroto stopped training. He ate little, spent hours staring at the floor he once swept. Shame turned into awareness, awareness into humility. He began to see the truth behind Musashi's stillness, a truth the world rarely taught. The ego cannot be destroyed by force. It must be dissolved by observation. When the mind sees its own illusion clearly, it weakens on its own. Musashi watched from afar as the boy sat in reflection. He knew this was the hardest part of the path, to face the enemy within that wears your own face. On the 7th day, Hiroto approached him again. He bowed deeply, forehead to the floor. Master, he whispered, I no longer wish to win. I wish to understand. Musashi smiled faintly, as if hearing his own younger self. Then, he said, you are finally ready to lose everything unnecessary. The next morning, Musashi gave Hiroto no sword at all, only a simple command. Go to the forest, live in silence, and learn the discipline of emptiness. Hiroto hesitated. For how long? Musashi turned away. For as long as it takes for you to hear the sound of your spirit again. That night, the boy gathered what little he had and walked into the dark woods alone. The moonlight followed him, soft and pale, like a silent witness. Each step away from the dojo was a step away from everything he thought he was. Ego had been shattered. Now came the true forge, the discipline of emptiness, where the spirit would be stripped bare to be remade. Chapter 4. The discipline of emptiness. The forest was silent, not the kind of silence that comforts, the kind that confronts. Every sound echoed louder when you were alone. The rustle of leaves, the hum of crickets, the slow beat of your own heart. Hiroto had walked for hours before finding a clearing beside a river. There he built a small shelter of bamboo and branches, as Musashi had once taught him. He had no fire, no food, only his sword, his breath, and his thoughts. The night came quickly, cold, raw, uninviting. He sat beneath the stars, listening to the forest breathe. Every instinct screamed for distraction, to sing, to talk, to do something. But Musashi's last command rang in his mind like a bell. Learn the discipline of emptiness. So he stayed still. By the second day, hunger began its lesson. The body rebelled, mind flooded with craving. He imagined the smell of rice cooking in the village, the laughter of other students. He clenched his fists, whispering, "Why am I here?" And then, the realization came. That question itself was the very thing Musashi wanted him to confront. Hiroto was not there to gain anything. He was there to lose what clouded him. Noise, desire, ego, everything that made him forget the stillness he once touched on the mountain. As the days turned to nights, and back again, his body grew weaker, but his awareness grew sharp. He began to move slowly, deliberately. Each step had intention. Each breath was a lesson in control. When he fetched water, he listened to the sound of the river colliding with stones. When he chewed wild roots, he felt every fiber, every taste of earth. He was learning precision through presence. Musashi had once said, "Discipline is not restriction, it is remembrance." Now, Hiroto understood. Discipline wasn't about forcing the body. It was about returning the mind to the moment again and again, until stillness became natural. One morning, as the first light spread across the forest, Hiroto stood with his sword unsheathed. He closed his eyes. No stance, no form. He simply breathed. Then, without thought, the blade moved, not from mind, from instinct. Every cut was clean, every motion born from silence. It was no longer practice. It was communion. For the first time, he felt no separation between his breath, his body, and the blade. The sword was not a weapon. It was a mirror, reflecting his inner state. In that emptiness, Hiroto discovered what Musashi meant by the ancient system. Not a set of techniques, but a way of being. The way of emptiness, where mastery is not adding more, but removing what clouds the spirit. Weeks passed. He began to feel the forest, not as a place, but as a teacher. The trees stood disciplined yet graceful. The river moved endlessly, but never lost its course. The wind bent the branches, but never broke them. Everything was strength, without resistance. Modern science would later call it flow state, when self dissolves and consciousness merges with action. But Hiroto did not need words for it. He could feel it. A quiet unity with everything that breathed. One evening, he returned to the river and saw his reflection on the surface. The boy who once sought power was gone. In his place stood a calm, lean figure. Eyes steady, face weathered, yet peaceful. He bowed to his own reflection, not in pride, but in gratitude. Then, from behind the trees, a familiar voice emerged. "You've learned well," said Musashi, stepping into the clearing. Hiroto turned, his heart still. "Master," he whispered, "how long has it been?" "Long enough," Musashi replied. "The forest taught what I could not." He walked closer, examining the young man. "No tremor in your hands. No fire in your eyes, only stillness. That is the mark of mastery." As the two sat together beside the river, the wind carried the scent of pine and dawn. Musashi looked at him with quiet pride. "You have emptied your cup," he said. "Now it is time to fill it again. Not with noise, not with ego, but with presence." He stood and gestured toward the path home. "At sunrise, we duel. Not to fight, but to listen. The next morning, they would meet in the courtyard once more, not as master and student, but as mirrors of one another. In the stillness of dawn, where silence meets motion, Hiroto would face his final test. The Silent Sword. Chapter 5. The Silent Sword. The morning arrived without sound. Mist hung over the valley, like breath paused in time. The dojo courtyard, once filled with shouting and clashing wood, now waited. Still, sacred, expectant. Hiroto stood barefoot on the smooth stone floor. His robe was simple, his sword polished but unadorned. Across from him, Musashi approached with the slow calm of a man who had already fought at 1,000 battles and no longer needed victory. Neither spoke. The wind brushed through the bamboo. A crow called in the distance. The sun began to rise, and with it, the duel began. Their blades whispered through the air. No roar, no cry, just motion, measured and silent. To anyone watching, it would have looked almost like a dance. Two figures moving with impossible grace. each movement precise, deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to watch. Hiroto's breath matched the rhythm of the wind. Each step was instinct, each block, each strike, effortless. There was no anger, no pride, only presence. He wasn't fighting against Musashi anymore. He was moving with him. The master's attack flowed. The student's defense adapted. Yin and yang in motion. Steel met steel, and the sound rang, not as violence, but as truth. Musashi's eyes never left Hiroto's. They were calm, steady, watching. Then, without warning, Musashi advanced, faster, sharper, like lightning breaking still skies. Hiroto's body reacted before his mind did, parrying, stepping, countering, not from thought, but from the deep silence within. And then, it happened. Hiroto disarmed Musashi. The old master's blade fell softly to the ground. The boy froze, sword poised near Musashi's shoulder. Time seemed to stop. Musashi looked at the blade, then at the young man holding it. A smile, faint and wise, spread across his face. "Strike," he said quietly. Hiroto's hands trembled, not from fear, but from realization. He lowered the sword and bowed deeply. "My sword no longer wishes to harm," he said. Musashi nodded, eyes glinting with light. "Then you have learned the lesson that cannot be taught." He stepped forward and gently pressed his hand against Hiroto's chest. "There," he whispered, "is the real blade." Hiroto closed his eyes. He could feel it, a quiet pulse of energy, centered, steady, infinite. That was the silent sword Musashi spoke of, the power that no longer needed to prove itself. They sat afterward in silence beneath the trees. Birds began to sing again as the light of morning spread across the valley. Musashi spoke softly. "When I was young, I thought mastery meant conquering others. But in time, I learned. Every duel was only against myself. When I silenced my fears, my blade grew sharper. When I silenced my ego, my strikes grew true. And when I silenced even victory itself, I realized the sword had never been my weapon. It had been my teacher." He looked at Hiroto, eyes heavy with a lifetime of understanding. "Now you carry that silence. Protect it. The world will try to fill it again, with praise, with noise, with the endless chase for meaning. Guard your stillness as you would guard your life." Hiroto bowed deeply. "Master, how will I know when I've gone astray?" Musashi smiled faintly. "When you begin to speak too much of what you've learned." They both laughed, quietly, honestly. The wind passed through the courtyard again, lifting a few fallen leaves into the air. In that moment, Hiroto realized this silence was not emptiness. It was fullness, the fullness of peace, of presence, of being. Modern thinkers might call it integration, the merging of conscious and unconscious mind, the state where thought and action become one. But Musashi's words captured it with greater simplicity. When the sword moves without hesitation, the spirit has already won. The duel was over, but the lesson would echo long after the sound of steel had faded. Hiroto sheathed his sword. The motion was slow, deliberate, complete. The same way he once swept the dojo floor. The circle had closed. The boy had become the warrior, and the warrior, at last, had become still. Musashi rose and looked toward the horizon. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will train no more. You will live." But before Hiroto could truly live, he had one final dawn to face. The dawn where the world wakes, and the awakened man stands still. Chapter 6. Conquer yourself before dawn. The night before his final dawn, Hiroto could not sleep. He sat on the wooden porch outside his small hut, watching the moon's reflection tremble in the water basin. The air was cold, sharp enough to remind him that the world was still alive, still moving, still testing him. He had trained for years to master the blade. He had learned silence, stillness, and the art of presence. Yet now, in this quiet before the first light, a strange fear returned. Not the fear of battle, but of being. Musashi's words echoed in his mind. When the noise returns, protect your silence. Hiroto realized that the greatest war would not be fought on any field. It would rise within, against doubt, ego, and the endless whisper of self. He stood and began to walk toward the hill, where he once trained at dawn. The path was familiar, worn smooth by his own footsteps. Each step sounded like a memory. The strikes, the sweat, the discipline that once bound him. But now, there was no sword at his side. Musashi had told him to leave it behind. You have no more need for weapons, the master had said. Only those who are still divided require a blade. When Hiroto reached the summit, the horizon had just begun to pale. The world seemed to hold its breath. The moment before day breaks, when darkness and light still share the same sky, he knelt, feeling the earth beneath him. Cold, steady, grounding, and for the first time, he did not meditate to escape his thoughts. He watched them. Like passing clouds, rising and dissolving, the noise came again. You are not enough. You will fail. You are nothing without your sword. But this time, he did not resist. He let the thoughts move through him like wind through reeds. And slowly, silence returned. A silence that was not empty, but alive. The kind that breathes with the rhythm of the universe itself. Then, he heard footsteps behind him. Musashi. The old master stood with his hands folded, the rising sun painting his face in soft gold. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them was complete. Two souls sharing one breath. Finally, Musashi said, "You have come far, but now your journey changes." Hiroto bowed. "I still do not understand, Master. What does it mean to conquer oneself before dawn?" Musashi looked toward the sky, where the first light touched the mountain's edge. "It means this," he said. "When the sun rises, the world begins to move. People chase, fear, desire, forget. But before dawn, when all is still, you face yourself. Not the world, not others, only you. If you can meet that silence without running, without filling it, you have already won the greatest war." Hiroto closed his eyes. He breathed deeply, slow, deliberate. The warmth of the sun began to touch his face. He understood then what Musashi had meant all along. All his years of discipline, of striking, of mastering the sword, had been a mirror reflecting only one truth. He had never been fighting the world. He had been fighting the noise within. The fear of being nothing, the craving to prove, the restless search for meaning outside himself. And in this stillness before dawn, all of it dissolved. There was no warrior, no student, only breath, only being. Musashi smiled faintly. "The sword you carry now cannot be seen," he said. "It cuts through illusion, not flesh. And once you wield that sword, you will never need another." He turned to leave, but paused, as if remembering something distant. "Remember this, Hiroto. The world praises the man who conquers others, but peace belongs only to the man who conquers himself." And with that, the master walked away, his figure melting into the golden haze of morning. Hiroda remained kneeling, eyes closed, heart silent. He could feel the warmth of the sun expand through him, like life itself was bowing before the man who had finally stopped fighting. The day had begun, and yet, inside him, it was still before dawn. Epilogue. The moral. The silent sword is not a weapon, but awareness. The true path of the warrior is not victory, but surrender. The surrender of noise, ego, and illusion. Discipline, science, and presence are not cages. They are the gates through which the spirit walks free. When you master yourself before dawn, the world can no longer conquer you. If this story spoke to you, take a moment before you scroll. Breathe. Then, like this video, so more warriors find their path. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what lesson stayed with you the most, and if you walk the same road of silence, discipline, and inner strength. Subscribe, and let's keep walking this path together, one dawn at a time.